Ray Fregon, Assistant Director. We asked Ray to come because the topic PFAS is always ever changing. I know that Ray has a lot of exciting news for us, a lot of news for us, a lot of changes. We appreciate the time and effort and your ability to come here today. So thank you. We look forward to all the information.
Great.
Thanks, Ray.
Appreciate the invitation. So PFAS, yeah, let's talk PFAS. What do we got to say about PFAS? Let's see. So I'm going to give you a brief update on the PFAS action plan. This is part of the interagency task force that Governor Lamont put together back in 2019. And actually, Marcy, is there any particular location I need to be standing or
No, I
protecting?
can gather you everywhere with those speakers.
Oh, okay, as long as I'm with the speaker. All right. So here are the topics we're going to cover this morning. I'm going to bring you back to the PFAS action plan because everything that DEEP is doing is coming out of this plan. We'll talk a little bit about the drinking water updates that came from DPH and EPA very recently. Update on the take-back program for aqueous film-forming foam. Share a little bit of information about what DEEP and DPH are doing with respect to private well sampling in our state. We have a study that's been ongoing for a little while, looking at wastewater treatment plants. And from that, we discovered some issues in the Hockanum River. And we'll talk a little bit about PFAS and biosolids. Okay, the PFAS action plan, quick overview. There were three main categories of discussion. And we talked mostly about human health, pollution prevention, and remediation. So what can Connecticut agencies do to protect our citizens? And again, this is beyond just DEEP and DPH. It gets into administrative services with procurement of services and goods for all state agencies and trying to reduce our PFAS intake through that fashion, as well as DOT, any potential PFAS uses that they have, Connecticut Airport Authority, who manages Bradley Airport, among other airports in the state, and is a significant user of PFAS, AFFF foam, and far beyond. Pollution prevention, chatting about how we can minimize Connecticut's exposure, our human health and environmental exposure to PFAS. And of course, remediation. How do we identify potential PFAS sites? What are the types of industry that are, or activities that are common PFAS users, producers, emitters? And of course, the very tough project of determining how we can remediate PFAS. Okay, we'll talk about the drinking water action level update from DPH that came out last month. As you'll notice, we had a drinking water action level that was a summation of 5 specific PFAS. As of the middle part of June, that went to individual concentrations of 4 specific PFAS. So we did drop PFH-PA, just not being seen very much, if at all, in our sampling. And I'm sure, I won't speak for Department of Public Health, but there may be something to do with updated health evaluations. So I think we'll probably take questions at the end. I'm sure you're probably formulating a number of questions as we go through here. I may be addressing some, but we'll save that to the end. So I wanted to add that because the DPH drinking water action levels have changed, they've been lowered, that has a direct impact on DEEP's remediation standard regulations. So the same health criteria input for the drinking water action level relates to our direct exposure criteria, mobility criteria. So that's going to have an impact. We are working with DPH right now to update those numbers. I will add that the surface water protection criteria is still a work in progress. I feel like I've been kind of stringing folks along, saying it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. It really is on its way, I promise you. Could it be this summer? I'm very hopeful that it will be. Okay, we also had EPA issue health advisory the same day that DPH issued its updated drinking water action level. So you'll see some extremely low numbers here. We've got questions just like you do. We can't see this low. What's the point of going this low with a health advisory if we can't analytically go that far? The states have raised concerns with the EPA about this, and all I can say is that a dialogue is continuing, really, among the states and EPA. Okay, so now I'm getting more so into the PFAS action plan. One of the key recommendations from the action plan is the removal of AFFF from our state. Very concentrated with PFAS. Looking at the report incident logs from our emergency response unit, you can see just how often AFFF has been deployed in our state on a daily basis. It's a little scary. And if you were to look back in time over the years, I could think back the number of times I've personally witnessed a tractor trailer on fire on 84, 91, 95. We all have some memory of that. And then the vehicle being doused with foam to the point where it looked like a massive marshmallow. And what we know today, like, oh my gosh, what a problem we created in addressing these incidents. And at DEEP, we are not looking to vilify fire departments, not at all. We've had a lot of departments feeling really bad, like having a level of remorse that they had been impacting their neighbors, the environment, perhaps themselves for years, because they had been told that this product is safe. It's basically soap. And look, you can eat it. We've heard stories of firemen saying during training, it's that safe, I can eat it. I won't go too far into this next part, but speaking with a number of firemen, longtime firemen, and those that work among them, and hearing about the health impacts and the very early deaths among firemen, career firemen with the same type of illness that is directly connected to PFAS is a little unnerving. Okay, so why don't I focus on Public Act 21-191. That was really the push to ban AFFF for a variety of uses. So banning it for firefighter training purposes, there are green foams that, for training purposes that will do the job. We're also, banning the deployment. We have banned the deployment of the material. And this has been a little challenging with fire departments across the state. A challenging conversation, not because they themselves are challenging, but you need to have the green alternative in place. And to get that green alternative, DEEP and DESPE, Emergency Services and Public Protection, we did a lot of work together in coordination with counterparts from state of Massachusetts to identify products that are so-called green products that function as good as, or maybe better than PFAS containing AFFF. So one, can it do the job? And then two, does it really have any PFAS or anything else that we may see as a concern? So what we did is we did some trials just to make sure that the product works and purchased the minimum volume, a 5-gallon pail, and did our own testing of that material. Of course, it's a proprietary thing, and manufacturers don't necessarily want to divulge what's in their product. We get that, but once we've purchased it, we can do what we want with it. So that's what we did. We have endorsed at least one product, and we've shared that with fire service across the state. They have been in the process of obtaining that material. Every department that had previously used AFFF should now have the green foam on board. We're recommending, actually, I'll get into the recommendations in a moment. So the Public Act in 21 also implemented a ban on intentionally added PFAS in food packaging. We've got to start somewhere. We did have a level of pushback with the original language of this bill, and understandably, there are some sectors of the food industry where we need to give a little bit more time. And we also recognize that PFAS is part of cardboard packaging. There's going to be a level of PFAS in recycled cardboard product, so we don't want to completely shut down the recycling opportunities in the state. So that's the reason why we had the intentionally added word in there. Okay, the Take Back program, and I'll talk about the different phases. So phase one is the collection of containerized AFFF concentrate. This was funded by a $2 million bond allocation from the governor to get us started. And through this process, we have collected over 35,000 gallons from somewhere around 250 departments in total. This was a milk run style, meaning we'd actually go out to the departments, the individual departments. We tried to do some consolidation regionally, and then had folks call to schedule their pickups. Through that process, we brought the containered material to a central storage location, put it in, filled a truck, and sent it to a secure landfill in Canada, where it was solidified and then placed in the landfill with an appropriate liner. That was the option we selected, as opposed to incineration. Personally, I was looking at incineration as my preferred alternative for this material and how to dispose of it. We quickly realized that there's a lack of controls in place with that at this point in time. We're very hopeful that EPA and DOD will be moving in the right direction to identify appropriate sampling methodology to ensure that what's going up the stack through incineration, we can actually calculate that. And in total, we've spent roughly just under $1 million of the $2 million doing the collection. So my opinion, we have done a hell of a lot of good with $1 million. For those that are familiar with cleanup costs for PFAS, that's pennies for 35,000 gallons of PFAS concentrate. If that's deployed throughout our state, the cost to clean that up is, we don't have that kind of money. Phase 2, that's the decontamination of the foam concentrate from our regional foam trailers. So the state maintains 9 trailers strategically positioned throughout the state in the event that we have a catastrophic incident, a tanker rollover, a fuel depot catches fire, something really big where a significant quantity of the foam concentrate is needed. These trailers are there to respond to those situations. We need to decon these trailers or dispose of them and get new trailers. So what's the cost benefit? Well, we got to figure that out. So we retain 2 firms. We gave them each a trailer, drain the fluid, have a go at doing a hot water rinse, sampling, doing another water rinse with a proprietary cleaning agent, sample after that rinse, repeat and repeat. So we had 4 rinses in total with analytics after each stage, just to determine what a protocol would be. So we can establish an SOP based on the technique so that we could just move forward and do the 2 rinses or 3 rinses or 4, whatever we decided was appropriate. Phase 3, we haven't gotten into yet. We're still on the phase 2, determining that cost benefit ratio. So we are looking at what's the total cost, how clean were we able to get the trailers at the final rinse, and what's the cost of purchasing a new trailer. Of course, in this time period of COVID and supply chain issues, that's definitely going to be a factor, part of our calculation to determine how quickly we can get the remaining, I think we got 6 or 7 trailers remaining that need to be decontaminated. So moving on to phase 3, that's the decontamination of the tanks that are on board fire department vehicles and the associated piping that goes along with it. Now, as someone not very familiar with how a fire truck is actually constructed, thinking, well, can't you just cut the tank out and replace the piping? Not so easy, not so easy at all. Virtually every truck is custom built. You cannot just look at a particular design and say, okay, this is how we're going to do it, because each vehicle is going to be different. And they're so intricate, it would take more time and effort than the vehicle is worth. It is a quick calculation on doing full removal. So we are looking at decontamination, and that's part of the reason why we decided to try the decontamination of the regional foam trailers, to get a sense of how doable is this. Phase 3, actually implementing the decon of the trucks, is going to be funding dependent. Remember, I started with $2 million. We've spent almost $1 million, plus whatever we've spent so far on the decon of the 2 trailers. That leaves us only a couple $100,000 to pull off something that is going to be in the tens of millions, most likely, as a rough guess. So at the end of the day, given our available funding at the moment, if we're able to do a small handful of vehicles, we would very likely look to towns that are the poorer towns in our state that don't have the financial capability to do the decon themselves, and that also have a community that relies on groundwater for drinking. So that's where we'll likely go. A little bit about the decon process. So this is a photo of one of the regional foam trailers. It's a poly tank with a series of baffles on the inside. Right? So why the baffling? A little confused, like, oh, it's PFAS concentrate. This stuff is designed to foam up when agitated. Like, oh yeah, it's designed to go down the highway, so we've got to make sure it's not sloshing around. Otherwise, it's going to be blowing over the top. So what does that mean for decontamination? We've got a series of corners and walls, and it's just a massive amount of surface area to decontaminate. And then you've got the piping and the threading within the piping that harbors all that PFAS. That's the real challenging part, is to get that material out of those little hard to reach locations. And it's not just an open tank that you can pressure wash, for example. It's only got one small inlet and one small outlet. So you fill it with your cleaning agent, and then we actually hooked it to a truck and drove it around the parking lot and kind of like, stop hard, take off quickly, trying to agitate the liquid within. So I mentioned we had two vendors. I'll mention them. Arcadis and ACOM were selected, both firms that are on the DAS contracting list for investigation, remediation, project management services. Again, we started with rinsing, draining the material, gross rinse, and then 3 phases of the cleaning agent. And then we did, as I mentioned, sampling through each of the steps. Key takeaways: the proprietary cleaning agents did the trick. Way more than just a hot water rinse. Now, hot water rinse does a lot to get the residual viscous material out from the sidewalls, but not nearly enough. If you're looking at putting a green foam product back in that same tank, you're still contaminating that green product with the residual PFAS in the tank. So with the proprietary cleaning, we were able to get closer to 99.5 to 99.8% in that range. Is that clean enough? Well, putting a green foam back in is still going, even at that low PFAS level, still going to recontaminate the green foam within. But this is really a risk management issue, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a moment. The cost and logistics of doing the decontamination is not that easy. You're generating a lot of rinse water. Of course, you have to do this within in the right location. So we want a GB groundwater class for starters. We want to do this inside, undercover, secondary containment, a minimum or no floor drains in the structure if possible, just to minimize the potential for an unfortunate incident. And then the cost, the labor and filtration in implementing this. I'm not saying it's not worth it. I think it is worth it because it's still far cheaper than cleaning up a spill site. So back to risk reduction. Well, how clean do we really need to get these tanks? My opinion, we're getting rid of the concentrated PFAS concentrate solution and backfilling these vessels with a green foam. A residual level of PFAS contamination may be the best we can do right now. Look at the PFAS we have in this room, on our clothing, what we use every day. Does it make sense at this point in time to be shooting for Zero, less than 2 PPT, as low as we can possibly see at this point. I don't think so. So again, it's managing risk. Recommendations for municipal fire service. If they have the financial capacity and the maybe in-house expertise, or if they can retain, preferably retaining outside expertise to assist in managing the material, that's what we'd like to see. If you don't have that expertise, leave it in the tank. Lock that tank. Don't allow any of your personnel, whether they're paid fire department personnel or if they're volunteer, somehow, some way, lock out the valves, the connections to this tank so it's not being utilized. From DESPE, the suggestion was you can use external eductors to deploy the green foam on the incident. A very quick connection to the water supply on the vehicle. It's a 5-gallon pail that holds the concentrate. External eductor goes right into the pail, and you're in business deploying foam right away. Some departments have asked, and this has been several months back, well, we don't have the green foam yet. We can't get it, or it's not available at this point in time. I don't have the money, whatever the excuse is. Like, well, what do I do if I'm showing up on an incident? Well, you're gonna have to use best professional judgment. If AFFF concentrate is the only foam concentrate that you have, and you need to put that fire out to save a life, what I've been saying is save the life. Let's be very clear about that. Save the life, do your job. Not putting a dollar value on saving a life. Not going to go there. At this point in time, however, every department should have the green foam on board and should be using it now. We do have that enforcement discretion. That's why I say, if there's any doubt and you need to save a life, save the life. I would be advocating as someone that has the a say-so in whether or not we take enforcement action to advocate we do not in those scenarios. We have had at least 2 occasions in the state where AFFF foam was deployed in a non-life-threatening situation. Rather unfortunate, because it's a costly cleanup, as we all know. And it just didn't need to happen. There's enough information out there that there shouldn't be, in my opinion, there is no excuse for using AFFF now, unless you've deployed all of your green foam and the incident is still not under control and you need to save the life. Another recommendation was if you'd like to drain the AFFF from your tank, you certainly may do so in a controlled environment. Do not wash out the tank and discharge the water out the back door. It sounds kind of like common sense to those of us in the room. It's happening. It has happened. For the rinsing, if you decide to go with the rinsing, my strong suggestion is get someone, get an environmental consultant that you routinely work with, that you know and trust, to help guide you through the process. And as I mentioned, don't discharge the wastewater, the rinse waters out the back door or down into the sewer. Contain that material, set it aside at a secure location. If we have the funding to go back and carry on with the take-back process, we'll certainly collect that material. So again, this is really for the departments that are within the wealthier towns that have the financial capability of actually doing this, and that may be responding to routine incidents. I'm thinking of maybe a Stamford or Darien that's along 95 that may have quite a bit of response activity on the highways. If you drain the AFFF out of your tank, as we've mentioned with the regional trailers, if you're putting the clean green foam back into the tank without doing a rinse, you're automatically going to be recontaminating your green foam. Again, it's risk reduction. I get that. But if you want to really do the right thing, my suggestion is continue using the external eductor with the 5-gallon pails. I mentioned our phase 2 of the take back. We're involved with the cost benefit analysis to decon the remaining 5 trailers, or whether or not we will just go with brand new tanks or a complete new trailer system. We've got roughly 400 departments that have AFFF. Earlier I mentioned somewhere around 250 we collected from. Well, there's consolidation, regional consolidation that's happening. So you've got, pick a town, you may have 3 or 4 departments in the one town, which it's kind of unusual. New England is kind of special in that way that we have a lot of departments per capita, and it's because of our history. All right, moving on to drinking water testing. Just sharing some updates on a couple of projects where we found PFAS so far. Basically, where we've looked for it, we found it. Surprise, surprise, it's everywhere. But we've really focused on areas where AFFF has been used for training purposes, has been deployed for a specific purpose. Killingworth and East Hampton are 2 such locations. The Killingworth scenario, just briefly, is the Connecticut Water Company informing Department of Public Health, hey, we got some PFAS in one of our wells. We're going to shut down this well, use the other. Well, what's the source of PFAS? So utilizing the same $2 million bond allocation that we were using for the AFFF, we started doing some private well sampling in that region of Killingworth. Concentrations started going lower and lower as we got away from that particular well point in that neighborhood served by that well. And then the numbers started going up, higher and higher. Like, what is going on? So we very quickly got into a separate PFAS release altogether. And this has not been confirmed yet, but we have uncovered a local fire department firefighter training area where they use AFFF. East Hampton, that's the site of a large fire, a mill fire. We understood that everything and anything was thrown on this fire to suppress it at the time. We did some sampling in that general vicinity, and a shocker, we did not find PFAS until one property owner granted access, and the results came back with a blip on the screen of PFAS. Like, oh, what's going on here? Fire department right next door. And the working theory right now is that departments, after they respond to an incident, they're coming back, they're rinsing equipment, rinsing hoses, packing everything away for the next incident. That may be the source of pollution in those situations. So again, think about how many departments we have across the state where that activity has been conducted for decades. Testing of additional communities for the remainder of this year and going into next year. We have a new source of funding from Bond Commission, $1.125 million that we acquired last fiscal year, and that is now available in the current fiscal year that we are in. What's this going to enable us to do? Go out to way more communities than we have been, but it takes staffing, it takes time and support from consulting firms on our DIS contract. Let's see, mentioned on the screen here is our Pfas GIS project. So this is a project that we retained a consulting firm to assist us with evaluating industry codes that are affiliated with PFAS use, generation in some fashion. And we started, many of you may know that there's an EPA list out there of NAICS codes. There are other lists that are perhaps a little bit more exhaustive. We have gone everywhere to scour every possible list and make a very, very comprehensive list, and then locating through a GIS program where all these locations are throughout the state. And we're not saying that these are absolute PFAS sources. I'll be very clear about that. We are not saying that. It's just to get an idea, where are the potential sources in relationship to where our drinking water wells are located, so that we can strategically sample in these areas of the state that have a high percentage, a high concentration of groundwater users and a cluster of known or potential sources of PFAS. And one additional layer is environmental justice communities, those that are not, or that are otherwise unable to help themselves. That's where we need to be going. And that's where we are going to be going later this year. So for those firms that have reached out to DEEP with a scope of work proposal, I think it was maybe a year and a half ago, in time, we will be reaching out to you. This is way more work than we have staffing for. And thankfully, we have a level of funding that's able to assist us in moving forward with this effort. We're also hopeful that the supplemental BIL funding that was announced in tandem with EPA's health advisory last month may also assist in this effort. It's going to be very costly. And we all know that the analysis, the PFAS analysis, is very costly in and of itself. Installation of filters is, once we find it and it's above the current action level, we're installing the filters. Managing the filters, you're looking at sampling the raw, the middle between filters, and the polish. So 3 samples to make sure that your system is actually working. So you're tripling the cost. It really escalates very quickly, the expense. I don't know how I'm doing on time. I think I'm getting close to, okay, close to wrapping. So sharing some detail on the POTW analysis. We wanted to look at a cross-section of sewer sheds, those that are mostly or almost exclusively residential, those that are very heavy on industrial commercial, and then kind of in the middle, a nice mix. So of just under 100 treatment plants in the state, somewhere around there, 90 something, we decided with the funding that we have available, let's look at a third of those, which we did. What did we look at? The influent coming in, the effluent going out, the biosolid, as well as, in some instances, fish tissue with fish collected from the receiving surface water body. We do expect that the final report will be coming relatively soon in the next couple of months. I know that there will be a significant number of folks that will be very interested to see this data. I'll give you the lead in. PFAS is, it's in all the wastewater. No surprise. It was a sampling that we performed at the Vernon wastewater treatment plant that was a bit of a shocker for us. Preliminary data on fish tissue was indicating that PFAS concentrations were rather high, like alarmingly high. But yet the data from the treatment plant itself, the influent effluent biosolid, didn't seem to match what's in the fish tissue. So what's the implication here? Well, maybe there was a slug, or has been a slug, of PFAS waters going to the plant. Or maybe we have other sources upstream or somewhere within that watershed. I tend to think that we have more than one significant source somewhere within the upper reaches of the watershed. With that, we have designed a robust sampling plan to look at various sections of the river itself and a variety of fish tissue. So with fish tissue, you got to be kind of careful which fish species you're actually collecting. You want a mix of bottom feeders as well as those guys that are at the top end of the food chain, the bass. So we're engaged in that activity that's actually going on right now. We're maybe a third to a half of the way through with the sampling in that stretch of the river. Actually, we're going down to the confluence of the Connecticut River just to get a good sense as to what the heck's going on. Right? Fish swim. That's no big mystery there. So trying to figure out where we have points of restriction, if we have a dam or some other obstruction that's preventing fish from swimming within the stretch, trying to section off different reaches of the river. Lastly, biosolids. This is a conversation that is occurring right now between DEEP, Department of Health, and Agriculture. We know that there is a fair amount of PFAS in biosolids. Biosolids being applied to land as a nutrient amendment has happened in our state. It is not a wide practice. In fact, as of now, I don't think that we have any treatment plant, or we shouldn't have any treatment plant, that is taking biosolids directly from the plant to land application. We do have plants that are working with various manufacturers of pelletized fertilizer to take their biosolids out of state, process them. They may end up back in our state as a product, however. So we're very concerned about the agricultural areas of our state, and obviously protecting not only the farmers, but those that reside around that are utilizing the groundwater for drinking purposes. We do have a good dialogue going on with DOAG at this point. And at DEEP, we have been successful in preventing a large-scale purchase of pelletized biosolids from coming into our state to be used for agricultural applications. I say that as a good thing because we knew the particular source has PFAS in their product. And it was ultimately up to the farmers to decide to not purchase that material in bulk quantity. With the nonsense that's going on with Russia and Ukraine, that has caused a spike in prices across the board, but specifically with fertilizers, which in part are manufactured in Russia. So biosolids now become much more attractive, and we're very concerned about that. Yeah, attractive from a pricing standpoint. We're not saying that you should not use processed biosolids. Again, I'll be clear about that. But let's work with manufacturers of this material to ensure that they are doing their testing of PFAS so that we don't have this widespread issue across our state. Now, a bag of this pelletized material applied to someone's garden or lawn, is that going to cause an immediate issue? Probably not. But if it's done repeatedly again and again and again, then yeah, the potential is definitely there. And we have seen what's been going on in the state of Maine. Really, really unfortunate. Farms that have been worked for generations are closing. Cattle are being put down because the land is so polluted, because they brought in biosolids to replenish the fields for the cattle to graze on. The cows are ingesting the grass, drinking the groundwater that's all PFAS polluted. The milk from the dairy cow, the beef from the beefers, it's all PFAS contaminated. It's really, really unfortunate. And we don't want to see that happen in Connecticut. My last slide, next steps. I mentioned updating the additional polluting substance criteria for PFAS. That is being worked on now, as is the surface water protection criteria. Working on the regional trailers, the remaining 5, getting those either cleaned or replaced. Moving forward with additional private well sampling. Again, consulting firms that have reached out to DEEP. We are absolutely going to need your resources and expertise to assist us. Landfill monitoring. We have a lot of landfills out there. You may have noticed we haven't said across the board, okay, if you are a manager of a landfill, you need to test for PFAS. We haven't said that, at least not yet. We're slowly bringing PFAS into the mix through our stewardship permits, those that are being managed through a remediation division where you have a RCRA unit at the landfill. We are pulling PFAS in with the renewed stewardship permit. Does that mean for every quarter? No, not necessarily. We're going to work with each responsible party, whether it be municipal or privately held, to at least focus our PFAS analysis within the landfill proper itself. Are we going to find it? Hell yeah. But is it going to be at a concentration that we need to really do something about it? That's really the big question. And again, comes back to managing the risk. So finding PFAS won't be a big surprise. Who or what is at risk from that PFAS will dictate how much additional testing or other actions may be necessary in those situations. Well, there's a lot there. Yes, a very, very happy topic.
Multiple things. In this recent time frame, as you showed on your slides, EPA made like a 2 order of magnitude reduction on some of the target PFAS compounds.
Yeah.
They've also gone to notice with surface water aquatic protection criteria, which are in review period right now.
Mhm.
Okay. Give me your professional opinion on the quality of how much defensible science there is behind where they can make this quantum leap in such a short period of time.
You know, I didn't mention at the beginning of this that I did reach out to Department of Public Health to see if we could get one of their staff to join me this morning. Unfortunately, their toxicologist was not available to attend. We've got some very good folks at DPH that I have a high degree of trust in. And we are networking every week. We have standing bi-weekly meetings to share information, share knowledge, our planning, so that we have a well thought out process moving forward. So this exchange of information has been really valuable. And while I'm on that point, also say that networking with our counterparts in other states, with EPA, with consulting firms, has been absolutely fantastic. There was way too much information coming out on a daily basis for any one person to absorb it all. Networking with this professional community has been wonderful. So to your point now, what's my opinion? Recognizing who I work for, I'm not at DPH. I would say that it's not a lot of hocus pocus.
It's not a lot.
It's not. Really, really unfortunate. Why that low? You know, as environmental professionals, we've seen over the years, part per million. Then it went down to part per billion. And now we've got this emerging contaminant that has criteria in a part per trillion.
Well,
at
it's a criteria,
single.
it's not criteria, you can't.
You can't, right. Now it is what EPA is pushing. You can't quantify that.
In Massachusetts, when they were discussing this with the risk assessors, apparently, so this is the EPA's numbers, the first that are coming out from human health as opposed to like animal testing. And it seems to be based on children's reduction to
Well, it's
immunity.
Vaccination.
Yes.
it's a risk model. Are they treating the risk modeling that they're doing based on systemic toxicity, or have they crossed the path to carcinogens yet? Because it's a distinct difference there.
You're getting into a territory that I would have to stay out of.
That's just one more question. There's been some stuff in some of the popular press, usually online, like publications like The Guardian or whatever, which is one, and it's probably hyperbole on both ends of the spectrum. But the most recent article I saw is that the claim is that EPA is completely understating the problem, because what they should be doing is measuring total organic fluorides. And then you take a multiplier and publish information that here's a water supply, a private wells or water supply that's below the 70 or the 50 or whatever the state has applied. And they've done total organic fluorides and resulted in, well, there's really 10 times as much of these fluorinated compounds in the water.
Of course, we're fluoridating the drinking water.
Yeah, and I mean, that kind of information being released without being qualified. I mean, they didn't release anything. But the question is to your point, what's the risk assessment on? Because a lot of these compounds, they don't have any risk assessment data. Most of them.
Too many.
Well, I see Matt with his Right in the Rain book with PFAS coated paper. You know, Debbie, is that a PFAS coated plate? You know, I mean, look at everything that is around us that has the carpet, that has PFAS, paint, and the list just goes on and on and on. So we have to be sensible, is my opinion, in moving forward. Should we go down to, you cannot have, a part per, not even 1 part per trillion, but it's okay to roll around on the carpeting.
Or get in your car.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
2 questions. One, do you know if PFAS sampling is being pulled into NPDES or SPDS permit renewals? And the second question is, what's the working theory why this mill fire in East Hampton, where everything was dumped on it, is not showing any PFAS?
I can speak to part of
All
that.
right, let him answer the first one.
The Water Bureau is putting requirements for testing and investigations on PFAS compounds in renewal discharge permits, primarily pre-treatment permits. Or modifications.
Test them.
The example is that
Sampling.
if you're a metal finisher, okay, and your permits get renewed, you're gonna have a condition, you have to go investigate for PFAS. Even though that is like a complete aberration of what EPA has said, is that the presence of PFAS in metal finishing wastewater has to do with hard chrome plating, which nobody does anymore. And maybe more.
And even
But I would debate the fact that it's only hexachrome.
Yeah.
There's a lot of smart
Well,
metal
there's
fitters.
a lot of them that don't.
No, I'm saying, but there's a lot of metal fishers out there that, what's the purpose of, the PFAS for the mist, suppression?
Suppression,
It's
yeah.
because it's a surface tension, reduce drag out. So where's the money in the drag out? So there's a lot of smart people out there where I would hypothesize that they use it in a lot of places that we don't necessarily.
Beyond hard chrome plating.
Absolutely.
Okay, well,
beyond,
I mean-
hard chrome plating.
pardon me?
So there's some cold hard chrome plating and.
I mean, the beauty and the beast of PFAS compounds is that, its properties, for whatever it is, offers a lot or has offered a lot to a lot of society and what we come to expect. And so in that sense, those properties are put into use in many places that we don't even realize.
No.
Right?
Well said. Thank you.
That's the beauty of the beast.
So, Wayside Cleanup Advisory Committee in Mass, we're asking Paul Locke. So in the communities where you have identified this, so people are asking their environmental professionals, their towns, their boards of health, okay, so we got to filter on our drinking water, so okay for ingestion and drinking, but what's showering? And then it's summer, right? It's hot, right? Can we run the sprinkler and let the kids run through the sprinkler? Can we fill the pool? And can they, is it okay to swim in? And Paul's answer was, we can't tell, we don't know. I mean, with these EPA numbers down at unmeasurable levels, the science hasn't been done. Are you getting those questions?
We did get those questions with the releases that have occurred at Bradley.
Mm-hmm.
We all saw the photos of a white foam covered Farmington River. You've got a level of fish kill, small level, but a very high impact on fish tissue. And then after the cleanup, flushing of the system, the tissue levels did go down. They slowly went down over time, which was good. We did get folks much further down, like waterfront, Connecticut River. Oh my gosh, all that PFAS that went into the river, is it safe for my grandchildren to be in the river? There's so many other PFAS sources other than just this.
Shellfish.
And to have your children in the water, is that a risk? Again, I'll be clear, I'm not the health professional, but networking with those that are in the know, it's more of an ingestion issue as opposed to the dermal contact. And let's talk about sunscreen for a moment. That's heavy with PFAS.
Right.
We're spraying it, applying it. It's not such a big deal, as I understand, because of how it's applied.
So the other question was, so you mentioned biosolids, right? I mean, so we were just trying to kick off the whole anaerobic digester. Is this like, sort of gonna sort of put the brakes on the anaerobic digester energy business?
Too early to tell. I sure hope not. And I think we can find a way to still move forward on that front. In Connecticut, the vast majority of the biosolid generated in our state is incinerated. That's what we've chosen to do. And in hindsight, was that a wise move? I think so.
Sorry to introduce a correction, but we had a method acid representative. Gave the incineration of sludge in Connecticut is less than 50%.
That which is being produced in Connecticut. The information that I'm getting from Water Planning and Management Division, I don't have a percentage, but what I can say, it's a very high percentage. It's not 100%. We can agree to disagree.
Well, I'm just repeating some.
Yeah.
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 But regardless of whether it's incinerated, there's still concerns.
There's concern with the incineration. You're right. Right. And in time, when the technology is there, we will have to look at the emission, stack emission.
So the last one I'm going to ask is, so Woodard Kermit got some grants and went out and did some like soil testing across Massachusetts and also did rainfall testing.
Yeah.
To try to find out what background is. And I just, I wonder if you guys have seen that data, and also, is there, looking to try to find out some way to see what that looks like in Connecticut?
Yes, that's a great question, Matt. And the answer is yes and yes. We're networking with our Northeast state counterparts.
Okay.
We've seen a wide variety of data. How did you test? Where did you test? Why did you test at these locations? How far down did you test? And we actually, the last 2 semesters at University of Connecticut, we've been networking with a number of professors to get some students together to take on PFAS projects. And, these may not be the most robust investigations or studies ever, nor are they the most complete, but it's at least cracking the door open on these issues. So we worked with a group of students. We identified a number of state parks and did some superficial testing, top layer and maybe a 1 to 2 foot interval in remote locations where you would not presume that there's been ever any PFAS discharge. And we're finding PFAS, especially in that top organic layer. As you go deeper, it's just not there. So it's very clear that we've got some level of atmospheric deposition.
But it's tending to absorb into the organic layer.
Yeah.
That seems to be what
Right.
people are.
Yeah. Yes.
With the changes and all the criteria and the numbers going down and the existing APS, is there a hold on the APS if somebody were to submit one tomorrow for the sum of 5? Would it just be not approved? Logically, it's in evolution. Logically, we all know it's changing. So what is the thought?
If we receive an APS request in the next couple of weeks, I'd like to look at what the site is and kind of pick these one by one.
Sure.
If it's a known PFAS user emitter, maybe we need to hold. If it's just, hey, we tested because I don't know why, but we tested and we found something, but we really don't have any known or significant issue. may be inclined to let something like that slide. I guess I'd say it'll be case by
Case
case.
by case, but it goes to your risk perspective,
Yeah.
your risk and risk mitigation.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
I don't want to over-regulate this. We want to be sensible and reasonable.
Understood.
Ray, do you have any info on how the municipally owned or privately held water utilities, whether, NBC, Regional Water Authority, Connecticut Water Company, what their profile on PFAS and their supplies look like?
So I have not seen the report yet with the initial data. All that, the report should be coming out relatively soon. I know I'll get a bootleg copy at some point soon.
Because there are other parts of the country that, whether it's municipally owned or private, that have been doing on, water supply, not individual water supply systems for, I think in North Carolina, they've been doing this for a decade. And they report it every year in their annual water quality report. I'm just wondering when we're going to start, when is the health department going to require that?
Oh, I'm sorry. So the larger community systems, the largest public water suppliers have already been required under the UCMR process to evaluate for PFAS. And thankfully, in that first initial round, we haven't seen much. And that goes to our, speak for myself here, sensible land use in our state and where we're getting our drinking water from. It's well designed. As DPH has been looking to smaller and smaller systems, it was those over 10,000. Now it's the next category that's being evaluated. We're starting to see some PFAS concentrations arise. And right now, it's been, well, we'll just take that one well offline. And that solves it. The other wells are fine. Like, well, okay, well, when will it be for these other wells to start drawing that groundwater in? It may be a matter of time. There are systems that are going to need filtration, and it's going to be very costly. If you've read about what's happened in New Hampshire at Pease International Trade Port, former Air Force Base with a big PFAS problem. Millions and millions of dollars to construct a very significant filtration system. Will that happen in Connecticut? I'm sure that it will. With PFAS, I think it's just a matter of time. But in large part, I think we are very fortunate. And I'm not with tourism or anything, but Connecticut's we've got a lot to offer because of the land use planning and where we derive our drinking water from. We're not collecting our drinking water from surface water bodies that have discharges of sewage up gradient. So, yes.
So what would be the forecasted message to all facilities that hold pre-treatment individual things in the future when the wastewater or PFAS method is approved? What's the plan that EP might have there?
So as you've heard, these gentlemen, we're correct. Yeah, they've already started. If you are a potential PFAS emitter and you're up for renewal, modification, you will be asked to evaluate the presence of PFAS in your discharge.
If you're up for renewal or
Right. Otherwise, if we,
modification of your permit.
right, if our agency said, okay, everybody test for PFAS, there'd just be this overwhelming amount of work.
enough labs to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Not enough labs to do it, not enough resource to manage. Understanding your processes, not like the custom process at that facility, but, you know, as has been mentioned, some metal finishing activities, the NAICS codes that are commonly associated with PFAS, those codes will be called out, like, yep, it's highly likely, or it's at least some level of potential that your discharge could have PFAS. Even if you don't have that particular product, you've customized your activity, maybe in the last several years to do away with PFAS, maybe the operation decades ago did have PFAS in the system, and you're still using the same piping and quenching tanks and what have you, that still may be residually polluted.
So, if your permit is not expiring anytime soon, you're pretty much okay to wait until it does, and then you're gonna take a sample for it. And then once you sample, what happens then? Based on the results, is DEP going to require, let's say, filtration?
So recognizing that my lane is remediation division, I'll step outside of my lane a little bit and say, yeah, you're going to need to do filtration. If you're discharging the,
Right? And what about the actively remediated sites? Will they be required to sample groundwater too?
actively remediated, for any site that's being investigated and cleaned up, you're looking at your contaminants of concern. So if PFAS is likely, should be looking at PFAS. Oh, we had a fire here. Oh, the tires in the barn area of our structure caught fire, and yeah, there was some AFFF deployed. You got to be looking for PFAS, at least for that AOC.
Is that communication going to be sites?
That's already out there, as it's part of the prevailing standards and guidelines that goes into the thought process of designing your investigation.
From a wastewater perspective, I want to say, at least not the March remediation roundtable, I believe there was the part of the presentation indicated from a wastewater discharge perspective, the discharge limit was intended to be ND. That was put out there.
Now, I'll say, whatever industry is held to, we're held to the same standard. We've got all sorts of actions going on the state's dime, whether it's emergency response activities or University of Connecticut, not that I'm picking on UConn, but it could be any state organization that has a fire suppression system. And hey, what do we do about this? We have to flush the system. We have to clean it out. We're held to the exact same standard. And yeah, it's non-detect for the discharge.
Right, so we've talked before about the problem with manufactured topsoil and street sweeping, PAHs and metals and DDT, and we talked about that. And I understand the issues of regulating commercial products, but on pretty much any redevelopment site of any scale, they've got to buy manufactured topsoil because there just isn't enough natural topsoil available. But another compost, we don't think of that like on the agricultural land of applying biosolids, but biosolids are another input into the manufactured topsoil market.
Biosolids, compost,
Right.
Yes, composting paper plates and paper products that are PFAS impacted. Another big concern.
I mean, large new residential developments and stuff. Is there any, and are you talking to your DPH colleagues and saying, hey, maybe we should be grabbing some bags from, hate to say H.H. Scott, but they're big guys, and just see. I mean,
the PFAS action plan, it's in there. So we will get to it, but it's a matter of, where do we get the best bang for the buck? Yeah, triaging, exactly. So I may be over on time. I'm sorry, Marcy.
No,
So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Let's take 5 minutes, just so that we can pick up for, we've got waste, we've got air, and we've got relations after. So grab some extra food, grab some coffee, and we'll kick things off with, boy, take a time. Do you have anything else on water?
I would throw something in there. Thank you.
If you haven't checked the box on the sign-in sheet, I'm gonna circulate that around to the tables, but, Wojtek's gonna kick off the water update, and hopefully some will show up in the next couple of minutes. You got something down.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Lee. Good morning, everyone. Again, thank you for being with us. As you review our update, you'll see there's a lot of notes that say there are no changes, right? And thanks to Jay, we did get a quick update on the SIU GPs. And basically, now it's Nancy Wallenberg that oversees that program. So if you have any overarching questions, that's whom you should be contacting. They did process some notices of insufficiencies before Ozzy's retirement and issued some approval. So there is some work going on there.
And I just want to pipe in on that. Something that we hope to get is some better tail of the tape later on when they get through all of the SIUs to have a better understanding of the time, the effort, what took to go through it all. But that's a work in progress. We'll have to get whoever Ozzy's replacement and some of the other new supervisors in here to have some conversations with us. So, thank you.
And then on the expired commercial stormwater, right? We can't see the date here, but that's expired.
It expired in the middle of May. I don't remember the exact date, but still TBD. I've been hearing they're gonna reissue, publish an extension or the reissuance without modifications for a period of time, and then a reissuance for a new one. Obviously, with all the changes in the department and retirements, there's a lot going on. A lot of people are busy figuring out what, who's doing what. So more to follow.
No, Lee, who was the deputy commissioner that we were trying to get here to join us to provide updates on all the?
There is no deputy commissioner, that's.
Well, the gentleman that stepped in for Katie Dykes during lunch. Okay, would he still be coming to provide the updates as to?
We're trying to.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I think that would be a good time for a lot of updates from the different departments to have an understanding of
Who's doing what?
who's where. So.
Right.
You ain't kidding. But, I had a conversation with Brett offline, for example, and they're interviewing now for all of the division director jobs. So for those of you who don't know, Bob Eisner left. You don't have Ozzy anymore. Jan Chachaka left. So Ray's doing Jan's job, and he's interviewing for Jan's job. One would hope that, for example, is a formality, but it's the government, so one never truly knows. So I don't think they're gonna have the deck chairs aligned on the Titanic until end of August, beginning of September anyway, so.
And that being said, in that case, they may not be willing to come and sit in front of any of us anytime in September.
We're gonna try it.
Yeah, no, we'll keep trying, and when they're ready, I'm sure we'll be ready, so.
And then we had some updates on Pfas, but we've heard a lot of it.
Yeah,
already,
we've
so-
heard all the updates.
I mean, my question for the regional, industry here that discharges to Hartford MDC is, what do we know about them being scrutinized by DEP and apart from maybe the landfill, who are the, culprits that might be targeted? I'm not sure if anyone knows the answer to that.
Well, I think, what we heard is the targeting is if you have a new permit application or modification going in, they're asking for information. All the SIU responses, there were inquiries about, look at your process, look at the information, do your inventory and survey before you get to sampling. But, it's just around the corner. It's right there. Or it's here now.
At least they're asking for a declaration, that you've done that and I certify.
Yeah, well.
That's my knowledge of the
And that's a hard
legal
bit to do because, the information is, doesn't, tighten it down enough based on SDSs or any other confidential business information. You're not necessarily going to know truly whether you have it or you don't have it.
And that's slowly changing, because if you take a look at DEP's public notice website, they just public noticed a permit for a metal finisher that when passed, didn't even talk about doing a quote paper survey
Sure.
and write the testing.
Yeah, I think, Ray, pointed out today, a lot of it's from a risk perspective. If it's a potential greater risk, it may make sense to go right to testing. But for, I think, many of the rest, it's just, do the survey and understand if you may or may not have it. The hard part is it's ubiquitous.
Well, I mean, my question was more like, let's test MDC's Hartford effluent and, what's coming in from the landfill. And if those two match, then everything else is risk-free. It's the landfill.
That's wishful.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be great.
Yeah, I'm sure they were, one of the first cuts.
Those will be
First 35.
published eventually.
Yeah, I mean, Ray had said there were 35, and I think MDC was probably, I know Matabas was one. I don't know about the rest of them, but I think that's a report we'll see later this year.
Okay.
So it would be like any other pretreatment, right? I mean, you find it and you start working your way
Right.
Yeah.
back
Yeah.
up.
Okay. Welcome back, Debbie. Would you like to add anything else?
I don't have any.
All right.
I was hoping somebody would have some speculation about Oxy's replacement.
No, none yet.
No, I heard Jeff Paola as a possibility, who's a wetlands guy, so that would be interesting.
Time will tell.
That's right. All right, thank you, everyone.
Hey, Deb, this is Beth Barton. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a quick question. At one point, one of the gatherings we've had, I think Katie made reference to the fact that there would be some of the people leaving who would come back on a contract basis. And Harold and I were talking, and someone had suggested at one point that Ozzy might be one of those. Do we know anything about folks who have gone and are returning in another capacity?
Beth, this is Tom Salmino. I don't know of any. The last time I spoke to Ozzy was late May, end of May, and it didn't sound like it from him at that point in time. So I'd be surprised, but I think he said he's gonna take some time to see what's going on, then decide.
Okay, thank you.
Let's do these two and then go back. Okay, on to the Air Task Force summary, and just running down the agenda there, the Section 4A regulation, that is a continuous emissions monitoring regulation. So if you have those, you should be interested. It is simply moving through its approval process. The latest was the approval by the Attorney General. We're still looking at a late summer, early fall 2022 effective date. Moving on to the next line item there, the addition of 1-bromo propane to the list of federal hazardous air pollutants. The only update there is the DEP did send out a letter, which I attached to potential sources, informing them of its addition and the need to start quantifying it. It's not regulated yet, but you do need to quantify it if you use it. I was curious, mine came by way of the SIPRAC email list. Any other industry here seen this letter or curious? Because it does say specifically the DEP has identified your facility as a potential source of 1 VP emissions, which they know something about my facility. I don't, as far as I know, we're not. So I don't know if they just blanketed the state or.
I had a client who used it and received a letter.
Okay. So be aware that that's out there and there is some action required. Moving on. We're going to skip the carbon emissions updates quickly. We'll come back to that. You'll see the Title V emit fees. The DEP gave an update on that during the SIPRAC meeting. You can see the numbers there, the per ton fee, the tons emitted, et cetera, et cetera. Invoices were sent out and due July 1st. So you should have paid those already. And then lastly, before we jump back, is the other topics there that were discussed at the June SIPRAC meeting include a update on Public Act 2225, which covers mobile sources, specifically some significant updates to the cheaper program. So electric vehicle incentives, chargers, electric buses, all that stuff. Lots of money and mandates discussed within that. The next two are discussed separately. There's a NOx RACT subcommittee, which is a very small universe of sources which are going to have their NOx emissions ratcheted down significantly. And there's some concern as to how they are going to comply with those numbers. So there's a back and forth with the DEP. We're still awaiting a response from the DEP in that latest back and forth. If you want more details on that, see me afterwards. 2 ozone exceedances so far. And the last two topics were sleep fests. Moving backwards, there was a significant Supreme Court opinion issued. And for that, I'll turn it over to Brian.
Hey, all. Yeah, the court case was West Virginia v. EPA. It concerns EPA's authority to regulate greenhouse gases, specifically under the so-called Clean Power Plan that the Obama administration had adopted, and our own Gina McCarthy was a key architect of. But long story short, as set out very nicely here in the summary, the Clean Power Plan was in, it was out, it was in. And the Trump administration's counterpart, so-called ACE, the Affordable Clean Power or Affordable Clean Energy Rule, that was in, then it was out. Long story short, the Supreme, as you probably read in the newspaper, EPA lost. The Supreme Court said that the Clean Power Plan was beyond the EPA's authority as granted by Congress under 111D, the Clean Air Act. And they basically said that, in particular, the nub of the issue was EPA had come up with a proposal, again, a key part of Gene McCarthy's architecture, was that you would have, these controls, those controls, et cetera, but you'd also have the so-called generation shifting, whereby EPA was essentially setting standards that states would have to meet or exceed or come up with equivalents of, to shift power from higher greenhouse gas producing sources to lower greenhouse gas or zero greenhouse gas producing sources, so-called generation shifting. The idea was to attack greenhouse gas emissions from the power sector on a systematic basis rather than within the so-called within the fence line of each industry and what that facility could or could not accomplish. So EPA said, that's a system. The Clean Air Act says best system of emission reductions. Sounds like it's the best one that we can think of. That works. And the court said, or 6-3 anyway, not so fast. Basically, it ran afoul of an emerging doctrine that the Supreme Court is referring to as the major questions issue. They basically said, and this may sound familiar because we saw this in the EPA's attempts to regulate greenhouse gases through PSD several years ago. The Supreme Court basically stepped in and said, look, we're more than a little skeptical if a statute that's been on the books since, for decades, with this language in there, kind of, vague, where EPA comes in and says, wait, this language gives us all sorts of new power to do all sorts of things that will, essentially restructure the power industry in the United States. The Supreme Court said, forgive us if we're a little skeptical that Congress, gave you this extraordinary authority that no one even knew was there until decades later. That's the argument. There's obviously counter arguments to say, system means system. It's, but, you can get into that kind of riff. And then, of course, underlying it, there's the considerable tension, political, societal, existential, however you want to put it, of the global warming issue. This is not just a regulatory spat over, 1 bromopropane, important as that is, for example. But the bottom line is that the court said to EPA, we're not looking to rubber stamp what you're doing here, seizing on any little scraps of legislative text that you can find and coming up with an argument that you've got really expansive authority that no one ever thought about before. There's further tension underneath here, and this is all I'll say on the topic. If you recall, back in 2007, the Supreme Court got into the greenhouse gas domain with a case called Massachusetts v. EPA, where they basically, EPA won that case where, against challenge, where the court essentially said greenhouse gases are an air pollutant under the Clean Air Act. And EPA does, in fact, have authority, in fact, has a duty to regulate greenhouse gases. So that launched the whole, climate change effort of EPA. But as I said, along the way, there was an attempt to use the PSD program to regulate greenhouse gases. And the Supreme Court shot that down, saying, essentially the same thing, that EPA is trying to seize on certain language in the PSD program and use it to essentially, vastly increase the number of sources subject to PSD, sources that were never intended to be pulled in, all because of greenhouse gases. So here we have the decision. The Clean Power Plan is once again out. It did not, unlike the last go round, it doesn't have the converse effect where ACE, the Trump rule, is now back in. Well, actually, I think it's a practical, actually, don't quote me on that. I forget exactly where that stands. But as a practical matter, is the Biden administration going to say, okay, Trump's rule is in, we're going to go enforce it? No, they're not going to do that. They've said that they're in the process of rewriting their greenhouse gas program generally, and specifically with regard to power plants. We haven't seen anything yet, but this really puts them back, the Biden administration's expansive ideas, back on its heels. Just 2 comments in closing. After any major Supreme Court decision of whatever the case, it's the end of the world as we know it, according to the newspaper headlines the next day. And, it is and it isn't. There are 2 comments that have been thrown out there that I don't think are ultimately valid, that will kind of evaporate off as, with the morning mists. One was, oh my gosh, the Supreme Court's going after EPA's ability to regulate for greenhouse gases or anything on a systemic basis. So what if cap and trade? There are various programs that incorporate cap and trade, Zapper and the like. And the Supreme Court expressly, they basically generally said, we're not talking about anything other than the Clean Power Plant here. So don't think that this means that EPA has to regulate and can only regulate a facility within its fence line, period. So I don't think that concern is a real one. And the other one is the major questions doctrine, so-called, where Congress is, the court's basically saying if Congress wants to give an agency a lot of power, it's got to say so expressly and not leave the agency to infer it. That gets into, Civics 101 lessons about separation of powers and all that kind of stuff. But the 2 things for greenhouse gas purposes that have already cropped up, concerns that the major questions doctrine is now going to throw into question some of the other features of the current administration's greenhouse gas programs or likely forthcoming programs. The Securities and Exchange Commission has come up with standards just recently to really tighten screws on internal corporate reporting or public corporate reporting of greenhouse gas impacts on their business. for investor and, due diligence and notification purposes. So there's a question there as to whether the SEC has that power. I'm no SEC lawyer, but I will bet you that that one is in a very different position. I'm not worried about the SEC losing that authority. The last one is FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They've been aggressively putting greenhouse gases into their regulatory analyses for, say, new pipelines and the like. And there's a question there whether they've got that authority to do so. That one, I'd say that's the more open question, So, the lawyers could go on and on about this, but they're short on time. We're probably behind schedule. And Lee is, but I didn't want to jam Lee any further than we are, having run over earlier. Any questions?
So apropos of Woj's question, Jay's response on pretreatment permits, the fact that we're finding aerial deposition of Pfas, any flutters in the purview of possibly asking about testing or?
Not that I have heard in Connecticut, but we're working with a facility in another state, Northeast state, where that for a couple of years now has been, that's front burner boiling over. But it's specific to the material, the input material into the combustion process.
Oh.
So, no, though, I haven't heard that, but that's an issue. Yeah.
I believe in Minnesota, they have a standard they call OTM, other test methods for emissions testing. And I believe it's now required for some facilities, but I don't.
Okay, yeah, that's the other key thing is, it's like on the water side as well,
Yeah.
how do you test? And, where's the lab that's going to do this reliably and all that? I'm not aware, Mark, fill us in if otherwise, that was still in utero as I understood it. And no, I have no idea what the gestational period is for that.
I work at a power plant and we've had to report CO2 emissions for years. It's just an emission factor. That's all it is. There's no testing. They wouldn't allow us to test. You either have continuous emissions monitoring or you use emission factors. So we've been reporting that for years. They have all that data. That will continue. So that's.
And that's for CO2?
Yeah.
Yeah. How about for PFAS? Have you guys heard any?
No, that's why I asked. We just had our water permit renewed a year ago, like just in time, it sounds like. So, but on the air side, no, not a word.
Yeah.
No.
So yeah, I suspect it's going to be very industry specific. Municipal waste combustors, hazardous waste combustors, and people who make PFAS materials, and that's it's been for probably a decade. Emily, you're more familiar this time. In
New Hampshire, there's a couple
yeah, New Hampshire, the New York, Southern Vermont case where air fallout is a clear pathway. Yeah. Yeah. Mark?
On the question of specific reference to generation shifting.
Yep.
Do you see any potential spillover into regulation policy that might impact technology shift? The technology for treating or controlling emissions. So if you think of programs like BACT or LAIR, are those potentially subject to the same kind of scrutiny on the major questions issue?
No, if I'm understanding your question correctly, no, I don't sense that that's an emerging issue or will be given new life. I think because there is relatively specific language in the Clean Air Act on technology standards, BACT, LAIR, ACT, whatever. There has been there have been claims that that's violates the delegation doctrine where Congress is supposed to set specific enough standards for EPA to go out and determine what is best BACT. But no, I haven't seen that part, and that's also embedded in the case we have here because it's the standard for the the Clean Power Plan in Clean Air Act 111D is best system of emission reduction. And the focus was solely on system, not best.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Drew.
Sure.
So Mark? Well, Mark's here, no problem. We should have a moment of silence for the Mid-Con facility. Its last day has been announced will be a week from today. So we won't have them to kick around anymore.
And like I said, I've heard that in last meeting, they're not taking in anymore.
Right, they're gonna burn what they've got. They're gonna burn what they've got, and I think it'll be till Friday.
And you know, the pile will be gone by then.
So it could be Thursday, it could be Saturday, but I'm guessing.
Yeah.
They're not going to transfer facility.
No, the transfer stations are gonna be in Torrington and Essex, I think.
Ships away from home.
And Luke Cronin gets his wish. What he's gonna do with that property.
Future super insight.
You know, I think Disney's gonna actually open up.
And that concludes my report. I'm Harold List today, and I have a sty in one eye, so I'm having some limitations as to what I can see in my notes, but just a couple quick updates. And I think significant in Ray's presentation was the reference to the APS criteria and how that would be treated in any current submittals or, future submittals. So I think that's something to keep an eye on. And let's see, we have the working group, the release-based remediation program. August 9th is the next meeting. Something that Ray did not reference, and I think people might want to pay attention to, is the issue of reopeners on closed remediation projects or closed landfills for that matter. And, that's a big unknown, is how that might be treated going forward. Just a reminder, the end of the month is a deadline for the EUR annual inspections. New staffing at remediation roundtable. And the retirements was discussed earlier, and I have no information on who might return to assist in that transition. And then all of the PFAS issues were addressed in Ray's presentation. We have a new acronym, CJAC, which is Connecticut Environmental Justice Advisory Council. And the information is there in the report, but I did note in Ray's discussion about prioritizing locations for testing, he made, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so apparently, that's likely to be a factor in sites selected for testing and evaluation. So, thanks to Lee, my time here is short. Yes.
I have one question regarding the waste. One of the things that Ray said was that the municipalities would be storing that PFAS wastewater. Any clue on reparate implications on that? I don't have any idea. Is it considered hazardous? I mean, they're gonna be storing it.
It's the responsibility of the generator to determine whether or not. Yeah, but to be honest, I mean, realistically, how many fire stations are going to be storing gallons and gallons or thousands of gallons of rinse water? Yeah.
Not yet.
Okay, thank you.
So, well, we're still on the topic of waste.
Okay.
But I do want to put Emily on the spot, so all of her a debt of gratitude.
Yes.
For, if you didn't go to Tuesday's release-based working group meeting, it was the Emily Love Fest. appropriately so, because really Graham owes you his job at this stage. Brendan Shea, so if you want to talk about what's going on.
Sure, so so Matt Hackman and Sam Haydock and Sally Kropp and I were on, and Sunscreen, were on the drafting team tasked with synthesizing the second phase subcommittee reports into a cohesive package, with also the subcommittee reports that had been prepared, about a year ago now. God help us, we've been at this for a while. So, we've synthesized all that and prepared a report for DEEP that basically, again, summarizes the work of the working group after the last year and a half. And so the punchline is, the broad strokes of the release-based framework are taking shape, but there are several significant areas for further study. Method 3 for Massachusetts has emerged as one of the hotter of those. I would defer to Matt to explain what that is.
Self-implementing site-specific criteria.
Right.
Based on risk.
There, also significant interest in Lee, I'm sure will be, the lawyers will, have to, ideally at a bar association meeting with wine in hand, have conversations about the mechanics of, passing the baton from one responsible party to another, perhaps similar to how they do in Massachusetts, but the framework in Connecticut will obviously have to reflect the statute in Connecticut. I think the big question from my perspective now is when we will see the draft regulatory text. And speaking only for myself now and not for any other member of the working group or drafting team, I don't think there's a heck of a lot more the working group can do to kind of brainstorm prospectively. I think now we kind of need to react to something, right? And the more we sit around and brainstorm, I think we've kind of reached
So,
the usefulness of brainstorming. We need to react to the text.
so there's two things. One, and I don't think it was at meetings all blended together
Yeah.
in one dystopian Zoom. But I believe it was the June meeting where Brendan Shane, still smarting from the legislature, saying that the working group actually needed to see the regs before
Right.
the rest of the public did,
Right.
pointed out that if that's what you want, that's what you'll get. But what you'll get is something very different than what you think you'll get, because I'm not going to turn around. Brendan thinks he's drafting the regs. He thinks he's the guy who's independent. I don't think he's wrong about that.
No, I think he must be.
Well, there are so many decision points and inflection points
Yeah.
that if he turns in the draft regs and he misses an inflection point, and the Massachusetts model for risk-based criteria is a great example there, that it'll take too long to turn the boat around and to go back. So I think what he thinks he's gonna do is have an outline of the regs that he runs by the group.
Yeah.
And have it be an iterative process, which would be fantastic. And I actually think that's the logical way to proceed, which is why I think that won't actually happen.
Right.
I think that Katie and Lehman make big, Lehman wants this done because it's gonna spur economic development.
Yeah.
So I am concerned about whether or not that process will actually get followed or not.
I don't know. The meeting in August is supposed to set forth the grand unified vision for what happens next, right? The work plan.
Beth's got her hand up.
Okay.
Well, you don't have to stop talking. I just wanted to add to what Emily said. I agree with her wholeheartedly that the working group really does need some input from DEEP. I felt like you guys did a great job of synthesizing everything, including the identification of some of the foundational elements that have not been resolved, or if they've been resolved, the resolution hasn't been shared with us. And what I found particularly interesting, because that's always the safe word to say, right, when you don't want to characterize something, but quite candidly, I found it incredibly unsettling about one key foundational element, which kind of gets to your comment about Commissioner Lehman and this is good for business, is it is still not clear what the scope of this program is. We've already identified multiple times and gotten to no resolution, for example, on residential, low-risk releases, fill. I mean, some pretty big deals. But the other one that came out in the last meeting was this whole concept of maintaining pollution.
Yeah.
And that has, as I know, certainly Emily, you and Doug, being the folks talking a lot during the meeting, fully appreciate, has incredibly broad implications, if, as certainly was, I think, suggested by Brendan's comments, is going to encompass any intervening property owner who didn't create pollution. And also it got me thinking afterwards, what about tenants? What's his position going to be on a tenant that might lease the entire site and control its activity? Is that someone maintaining a historical release? So I think there are still, I mean, I'm a glass half full person, but I think there is a key foundational element here in terms of the scope of what this program reaches that, I mean, maybe they're still working through what the answer is, but I don't feel like the working group either knows what DEEP's position is or certainly has the answer.
Yeah, I don't know that DEEP knows what its position is. And I think that one of the benefits to having a number of DEEP participants, all to their great credit, speaking fairly candidly and collaboratively, I don't think there is some deep position that they're hiding from us. I think they're still hashing it out internally. That is given a number of others.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you.
Yeah, and I think, I think Lee, the main fear, and it keeps coming up in comments, all the discussions is, a repeat of the comprehensive transformation.
Right.
Going out, you do the big report, you come in with all the recommendations, and the department goes, and then it goes away.
Actually, I'd be fine with that because we have a status quo waiting. My concern is that we don't repeat that.
Well,
and they simply go off and
into the black hole and something magically comes up.
And when they said that they didn't have the statutory authority to do the self-actuating risk-based cleanups, I called BS on that, and I went to the statutes and I went to the regs with a full head of steam, and I realized that Brendan was right. They don't have the statutory authority to do what I think they recognize would need to be done in order to have a real program that actually works. And I also think that, and I'm foreshadowing our government affairs group, but I think that that's one thing that this organization ought to put in front of the legislature next year. Because I don't think the regs are coming out even in draft form before the end of the year. That's just me putting a pin in something there. And if they come out that quick, they're going to be crap. That's the other thing, is that this is going to take way too long. But I also think that DECD has largely absented itself from any meaningful involvement in the working group, even though theoretically that working group is co-chaired by David Lehman and Katie Dice. And it is now Graham Stevens running that show with Brendan Shane, Robin Tibbs, Batman. And so at some point, somebody's got to hold the mirror up to the Lamont administration and to the DECD and say, do you honest to God think that this is going to be an economic boom? And the focus has far too much been on the fact that we need to be like the other 48 states that have some release-based system. When nobody's recognized, there's really only 3 jurisdictions, us, New Jersey, and Mass, that use LSPs, LSRPs, and LEPs to do the bulk of the work. And so we're in the majority now, it's us in New Jersey. And if we shift to the Massachusetts model, that's fine. But then let's shift to the Massachusetts model and adopt it 90% of the way there. And there's no willingness on Deep's part to do that. And I've kind of been working.
Well, they just keep saying their hands are tied. It's not willing, we can't do anything.
Right, so then we need to change the legislation. So that
Yeah, that, picking up on that, I think they both said our hands are tied and signaled an unwillingness to highlight statutory changes that might be necessary, because I've been, my personal view is that, as we kind of see the draft regs and flag problems with those, it's highly likely that we will also find issues with the underlying statutes, and there will be like a fixed package that we need.
if Beth is still on the line, Beth called back from Junction.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
Right back in September.
Tag team, give due credit to the tag team for pounding that drum from the very beginning.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the other thing that came out, so Emily, I think that was critical was, we had the Transfer Act, but it took a long time to get the site characterization guidance document, which really said how you're going to implement it. And it's been apparent from the first group of subcommittees that the guidance document and the regulations have to be kind of in parallel, because you can't figure out what the regulations are unless you figure out how you're going to implement them, right? And so,
And I think that was a wake-up call to a couple of folks when that got brought up at the last meeting. Like, the site characterization document is officially garbage under the new regime because it's a release, not a site.
exactly.
And not everybody's paying attention.
Yeah.
And yet, I think when you guys sat up again with legislators, it was things that you were saying, it was things that Beth, and you guys were already saying that. And so nobody was listening.
I think the legislators were. I think that's part of the reason why, I mean, credit to Ashley for getting Senator Cohen excited about this and incensed about this. Credit to Katie Dykes for saying no to Senator Cohen in a public forum, causing her to sharpen her knives. Where at least there are some individuals in the legislature who are taking notice of the fiasco that could result. Now, whether or not there's still the political will to do anything, but the legislature bigfooted Deep. Deep absolutely did not want to provide drafts of the regs ahead of the formal drafting process, and Deep got bigfooted. And we'll see whether or not the legislature continues to toe that line. I hope that it will do.
Just remember, this is the agency, Deep, that fought long and hard that the new program should go into effect automatically in July of this year, whether or not there are regulations. Just think about if that had happened.
The spill.
I mean, I just can't even believe they took that position, but I mean, thankfully, that's not in the statute that passed, but how long did they fight on that?
The entire time of the legislation. I assume that disembodied voice is Beth and not God.
Oh, sorry about that. Definitely not
Aren't
God.
those the same thing?
Well, God is a woman. It's entirely possible. All right. So more obviously will be happening in August and September. So we'll stay tuned. And I think that we can all agree that Mark on his own spurs a far more in-depth roundtable conversation than Harold. No, that you sponsored a violent debate in his absence.
Thanks to you, Lee.
Ashley, John, you want to send us home?
Wait,
to get the government fixed. No.
Saying, I'm doing cool.
Fine, but what the phone is?
Thank you, everybody, for being here. Grateful to have the opportunity to speak to the group again. And we don't have a very in-depth legislative update because they haven't been in session for a couple of months. But what I would say is that there are a couple things that I know that I'm tracking. There's a couple things that Ashley will touch on that she's tracking in the off session. There's a hydrogen task force, as you know, that was established as part of one of the bills that passed. They've begun to make appointments to that. It has manufacturers through to politicians. There's about 16 different appointments to that. So we're tracking who's on that. We've asked for one of our folks to be on that, waiting to hear on that. The other thing I want to touch on is the other thing that we do in the off session is we begin our advocacy group that Ashley and I are part of, a group of 5 of us, begin to put together in the off session legislative priorities in our different policy areas. So, you know, for me, obviously it's energy. I've been reaching out to folks to find out what might be important. I'd like to put it out to this group too, that if there's a pillar that you can think of that would be good for us to follow or be proactive on. We're trying to be more proactive this particular legislative session rather than being reactive in the energy and environment sections. It's been recommended to me that we might want to look into supporting some energy efficiency programs, both on the commercial and maybe the residential side. That could drive at cost and put us in a better position instead of fighting off costs, saying these are things we can do to improve costs. So that's just one example of a legislative priority that we're thinking about. But we certainly will bring back any legislative priorities to you guys to talk about and to see if you guys can help us tighten those up or have recommendations for other types of legislative priorities. The last thing I'll touch on is I was grateful I got the opportunity to go up to Boston on Wednesday to meet with the president and CEO of the American Petroleum Institute, Mike Summers. What I found interesting about it was there were representatives from Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and New York. And there was a lot of talk about electrification in each of the legislative sessions that have gone on. Obviously, hydro is important to some of the northern states like Vermont. But what I did take away from it, and I'm not sure you guys are all that surprised by this, is that we are in a regional position, that we're all affected by what's going on in the other states. The challenges that we face here in Connecticut sometimes might seem insurmountable or that we're alone. I didn't take that from this particular meeting. It sounded like regulators across New England, some a little more aggressive and a little more progressive like our state than others, but for the most part, the challenges are the same. And for me, it was great because it gave me a more global perspective of what we're doing here. And it was very helpful for me to continue to gain knowledge in the energy sector and better understand how the policies that we adopt here in Connecticut affect the region and Connecticut at large. So thanks. And I'll pass on to Ashley.
Yeah, what John said. I don't have a whole lot to update you guys. We just talked about the release-based reporting working group, so I won't repeat any of that, but we're following that, and it sounds like I'm going to have some possible bill ideas on statutes to take a look at, so I'll be reaching out to a lot of you guys for some input, maybe start a little subcommittee working group a little later on once we hear from Deep after the August meeting. So just keep an eye out for an email on that. And if you guys have any questions or concerns, just feel free to keep letting us know.
I think there's one that we just kicked around.
Yep. Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.